computer. Okay, so hello and welcome to Essential Pillars of Trustworthy AI. My name is Pamela Gupta, and I'll be hosting this session with a very prominent speaker on audit and a thought leader in audit, Ryan Carrier. Ryan, pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for joining me on this. I hope we can make this a fun talk.
Yes,
well, associated with AI and trustworthiness and audit, but we're going to get there. We're going to do this.
Subjects near and dear to my heart, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I thank you for having me, Pamela.
My pleasure. So, what is trustworthy AI? Why do we care? And when and where do we care? Right. That's what we're going to kind of go into, and how can Ryan's thought expertise help us in identifying some of the issues and some of the answers. So this is very much a dialogue to action series. We're going to be talking about not only what the issues are, but what can we do about them, right? So let's just get started and talk about one thing. I'll just give a small context, lay out the context of why this is important. And one of the things that I want to point out is that AI is such a boon to our lives, and we hope it will continue to be, and we hope that we are going in the right trajectory when it comes to intended outcomes. Okay. However, we also know that it is transformational in nature for a lot of different reasons. When it comes to risk and threat landscape, it plays a 4-part role, if you want to call it that. And so it's really significant to see what those are, and then what we can talk about in terms of audit being an essential pillar of trustworthy AI. Threat landscape for AI will list out. Number 1 is threats advanced by AI systems. So when we think about disinformation or propaganda campaigns, for example, that's an example of that. Number 2, threats from AI. What can we create with AI, whether it's synthetic or otherwise, such as deepfakes is what I'm referring to when I'm calling, referring to synthetic media, that can be highly impactful in our not only the way we look at things, but the way we are understanding and responding, our very essence of living, okay, and thinking as human beings. So think of cognitive hacking almost is possible because of that. Very, very highly impactful. Number 3, I would talk about is a threat to the AI stack itself, right? And that's where trustworthy AI is going to play the maximum role, will have the highest footprint, but it doesn't mean that that is the only place where it will. Okay, but and number 4 is moving towards the future in terms of machine-to-machine communication and decision-making, automation of decision-making. That is where we are in some areas, where we are going, and think about, in this case, for example, laws, right? Lethal autonomous weapon systems, for example, or I'll just stop that for, I think we have enough to kind of give you an idea of what, where the threat landscape is getting transformed by AI systems. And trustworthiness, like I mentioned, is really important for me. I've worked on this for about 4 years now, and I know it's becoming a buzzword, but that's fine. That is actually good, because it just shows that people and companies, societies are getting more at a global level, at a local level, are getting more exposed to the right rhetoric. So I think that's good. Okay, I'm going to just kind of stop there, and then at some point I'm going to jump into what is AI trustworthiness definition. But let's just go get started and talked to Ryan because I'm really anxious to talk to him because I know he has some really important questions and answers. So Ryan, on off to you.
My pleasure. So For Humanity is a 501c3 nonprofit public charity. We've grown in the last few years from really nothing to we're more than 1,100 people from more than 75 countries around the world. And it is an open community where everyone can participate. And our primary work, so that the mission statement, let's start with that, is to examine and analyze downside risk associated with AI, algorithmic, and autonomous systems. So similar to what you're talking about in terms of trustworthiness, we want to look at only the risks. Why? Well, because there's lots of people out there who are already promoting the positives of AI. So that's good. We view the tools as neutral, right? It's how they're applied by humans, how they're used, where we start to run into difficulties. So we're going to examine and analyze the downside risks. And then what we want to do is engage in as much risk mitigation as we can. Why? Because if we mitigate a lot of risk, if we reduce a lot of risk from these tools, then we make them more beneficial for whom? For humanity. And that's where the name of the organization comes from. And our primary focus in doing that is this concept of independent audit of AI systems. Pamela, why is that independent audit might play such a key role? Well, because in this ecosystem of technology, what we saw or found is a lack of governance, oversight, accountability, a lack of trustworthiness. Most of these tools are created behind closed doors, and most of the details are left in the dark. And so what independent audit does is it actually remedies these significant problems. And it's not because the actors who are creating these tools are necessarily bad people or that they're malfeasant, okay? What it is playing on is just an actual sort of example of human nature. Most of us want to do good until we get busy, until we get distracted, until we don't finish our jobs because no one's checking. We proved this through our education system years ago. Students don't do their learning on their own. They do it with a teacher. And the reason they do it with a teacher is the teacher checks their work. And so the nature of what happens, and we learn this as children as we're growing up through our schools, is that we behave differently when we know someone's watching. We behave differently. We study and prepare for exams because we know we're going to get graded on the work. And independent audit is the same sort of thing. So all of these entities that might do good most of the time, might do their work most of the time, their behavior changes when they know that an independent third-party auditor who is objective, who is doing their work not for the entity. Audits aren't done for the entity being audited. Audits are done for the third party, and that third party is the public. That's why we call them certified public accountants. It's where the P comes from. Audits are done on behalf of society that says, have you complied with the rules? And the auditor's job is as a proxy for society to go in and say, we'll check, and we'll do it objectively, and we'll do it independently. And we'll essentially say, yes, all of these rules have been followed. And so it's an entire level above, self-assessment, wanting to do the right thing. And it's essentially getting to a higher level to know that compliance has been generated. And we borrow this from 50 years of experience in financial audit, where we built an entire ecosystem, an entire infrastructure of trust that is relied upon greatly on the back of independently audited financial accounts and reporting. And we hope to get to the same place with artificial intelligence by essentially creating this confidence and this trust that basic rules of construction, of risk mitigation, of governance, oversight, and accountability are being built into the system in a lot of cases by design, because these are socio-technical systems. The human is not only receiving the impact from these systems, but they're part of the system through the use of personal data. And so that's why it's key and critical that we do this. Independent audit is a proven method for just raising the bar to create exactly what you're talking about, Pamela, trustworthy AI. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. And, one thing I want to point out for the audience also is, as Ryan's pointing out, the answerable audience here has shifted because of AI from stakeholders right now are not just the shareholders, right? It's the public. That's a very, very important shift, and something that, why we need professionals like Ryan to be leading this conversation, because he has a background. By the way, do check out his background on For Humanity. He is a very, very prestigious professional in the space and has a lot of experience, including having deployed AI technology. So he knows what is the view from an auditor's perspective, but also from a building of these systems perspective. So thank you for that, Ryan. I'd like to continue to what remember I was promising and dangling the the definition of AI and trustworthiness. What is it, right? Let me just rely on a National Institute of Security Foundation's National Security Commission on AI is the definition of this, because I find that to very closely aligned to what the way I feel about this. And one of the things they mention is that among the characteristics that relate to trustworthy AI technologies, right? Because after all, AI is technology, it's software and it's hardware. What are these elements? There's accuracy, resiliency. Again, you may think these are buzzwords, but hey, bring them on, because they are buzzwords for a reason. And we want to make sure we have the right rhetoric around these buzzwords. So accuracy, resiliency, security, privacy, explainability, and safety. And above all, wrapped around that is transparency or accountability, however you want to paint that. Now, when it comes to transparency, what comes to mind other than, yes, the very topic of accountability and transparency of audit, right? And that's what we're discussing here as why I want to make sure you understand the importance of audit in this whole picture of trustworthiness. So that being said, Ryan, how would you define an AI audit?
I would define it according to a set of pre-approved or agreed criteria. And I'm going to compare that to what we have in financial audit and accounting. For the last 50 years, we've used a tool called Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, or internationally, International Financial Reporting Standards, a way to normalize and level the playing field. Now, those are two different systems. So even where they meet, there's disagreement and problem. So there really should be a preference in the industry, in the marketplace, for a single set of rules, okay, for clarity and uniformity. If you have that clarity and uniformity, an audit here means an audit, the same thing as an audit here, and the same thing as an audit here. The whole reason those rules were created in 1973 was because we were seeing a race to the bottom. Accountants, those who were engaged in the practice, were competing with each other, and they were making it easier and easier. They were reducing tax burdens, they were reducing the way things were calculated, and it was lowering the integrity of the audit. And so when we talk about transparency and we talk about making this a valuable infrastructure of trust, we want to audit on a set of rules and criteria. Now, for humanity, we are this, mission driven. We're focused on protecting humans from these tools and mitigating the risks. So we think about ethics, bias, privacy, trust is our catch-all category, and cybersecurity, a holistic lens of the source of negative impacts to humans. So if you ask us, and look, this is still being discussed and defined all over the world with different sets of rules, whether it's data privacy rules, things like the Children's Code governing design and interface and how these tools are created, right down to the very large and soon to be very impactful EU Artificial Intelligence Act governing high-risk AIs. So what we espouse and what we fight for and what we work with by the way, we're working with governments on what these solutions look like, is a set of criteria that helps to mitigate these these risks to humans. So that would be the audit criteria done uniformly for all AIs as a function of the scope, nature, context, and purpose of the AI. The audit, and actually the terminology we use is AI, algorithmic, and autonomous systems. That's the scope that we examine. A lot of times it's because the autonomous system is driven by AI or algorithmic systems. And so it really is an interrelated mix of tools. But each different tool is unique in how it might impact and might have those negative impacts. So whilst there are many criteria that will be the same from AI to different AI in different jurisdictions around the world, there is a lot of commonality to how we build good governance, oversight, and accountability. But we do have to look at each individual tool and find the nuanced way in which maybe it provides more of a risk to privacy, or maybe it's more of a risk to cybersecurity breaches, or maybe it has more of an opportunity to have bias built into it. I'll give you an example of that. Automated employment decision tools,
Right.
which even New York City is looking at very closely, because there's a belief, and they're right, that automated employment decision tools may be filled with biased, whether it's data inputs, architectural input, data, architectural inputs, the way they're put together, or how they generate outcomes. And so depending on the system, we want to examine all these areas of risk and establish a set of rules talked about in an open forum, approved by governments and regulators where possible. And those would be the rules that we would essentially conduct these audits on. For Humanity doesn't do auditing. We don't do pre-audit service. All we're trying to do is build this ecosystem, this infrastructure of trust, helping governments and regulators to establish this level playing field, and then training people on how to be compliant with this, training the CPAs of this world. We call them For Humanity Certified Auditors, FHCAs. That answer the question, Pamela?
It does. Thank you. And that is actually very valuable, because AI audits are not going to be understood by your conventional audit teams, right? Then when it comes to corporations or organizations of any time, right? So the more we can get the right understanding, the better outcomes for humanity, for humanity. So
yes.
Okay, all right. So speaking of that, since AI audits do have a different almost purpose and flavor and being, who would you see effectively performing them in an organization?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So there's a couple of different ways I would answer that. The first is, let me reflect on kind of something that you said, which is we have a world of auditors, and kind of are they appropriate for this? Well, I will share with you that a global head of one of the big 4 years ago said to me, my team, my staff are not competent, they're not sufficiently trained to conduct these audits. So we can't look to the world of financial auditors and say they'll do it.
Right.
It's a different kind of audit, exactly as you said. And in fact, just today, a major, essentially provincial CPA body said, we want to figure out how we're going to retrain our people to do these kind of audits. And so it's really exciting to see the world shifting in this way. So, kind of that's part one. Part two is we're still going to use the 4 lines of defense that exist in standard risk management procedures, right? We're still going to train, and we're going to increase the ability of the people doing the work, designers, developers, data scientists, engineers. We want to raise their bar in understanding these risks and what compliance looks like. We're then going to introduce a second line of defense, and we use a committee structure to do this. And we put names to them: Algorithmic Risk Committee, Children's Data Oversight Committee, as examples, standing and empowered ethics committees, because unfortunately, when you deal with socio-technical systems, you're embedding ethics into the tool.
Right.
And what we need are people who are trained and empowered and understand and expert around all these instances of ethical choice that are built into these models. And that belongs to a standing and empowered and trained ethics committee. And by the way, this isn't a second line of defense that we have in place. So we need the second line of defense of these experts who are trained in algorithm risk, who are trained in these instances of ethical choice embedded in the system, trained in the special and unique risks of children as they interface with these tools. So that's our second line of defense. Third line of defense is the same as it is in financial audit, which is internal audit and or risk management. But they have to be trained on new things, right? They're looking at new risk controls, risk treatments, processes for evaluating risk, and so on. That is built into the audit infrastructure of independent audit of AI systems. And then finally, the fourth line of defense is the external auditor. And this is key and critical because they are objective overseers of, have you achieved compliance? And so they will work with that interface to basically see if compliance has been met. And they arrive independently with no other financial remunerations from the entity, just like Sarbanes-Oxley defines, and with the risk of false assurance of compliance. And that risk is key and critical to building this infrastructure of trust, because without it, they might be incentivized to show compliance where compliance is not there.
Right.
But if we have proper independence in place, again, as defined by Sarbanes-Oxley, as defined for Humanity matches that definition in our work, then we know that when they say that compliance has been achieved, we know that that person, that entity, is not incentivized to say otherwise. They're incentivized to say compliant when compliance is there, and non-compliance when they're not sufficiently compliant. And this establishes that 4 lines of defense that is good for robust risk management and plugged into existing enterprise risk management and operational risk management.
Right. Not having the right knowledge is a risk by itself at the auditing level. So to ask the right questions, because, hey, you know what? We know, and I know, we cannot possibly anticipate everything, right? So some of your experience, when you go into an environment, that comes very handy, right? That is absolutely essential, because you know the right questions to ask that may be very, very contextualized. So depending on how they're doing things, what is the technology they're using, what is the, well, I hate to say the supply chain, but yes, what is their sourcing of, whether it's software or hardware or APIs, what have you, right? You have to know how to ask the right questions. Without that, that compliance that you are saying is a check mark on a checklist is really not even what the paper it's on, or the digital paper it's on.
Well, and this is actually a really key point, and it's changing right now, Pamela. So we had 2 worlds of liability. You talk about the supply chain, and by the way, the supply chain is a huge problem in this space. That's why I'm kind of interrupting you, because it's a fantastic point. So we had this supply chain, but we had 2 worlds of liability. We had product liability, strict product liability. You build a car, the brakes fail, you're in trouble as a manufacturer. But then we had software liability that said, here's your tool. Oh, we're not responsible for anything that you do right now. That's software liability, right? No liability whatsoever. So we had these 2 worlds colliding. The EU Artificial Intelligence Act started to rectify this. And just in the last week, they're basically coming down with AI liability law. And what they're saying is that there is strict liability from a provider down to a user. And so what that will entail is that you can't show up as the provider and say, oh, this is my software, good luck to you. I'm not liable for anything. No, they're going to show up and they're going to say, here's how my tool works. Here's the exceptions. Here's the anomalies. Here's the dysfunctions. Here's the expected foreseeable misuse. You need to be aware that things can go wrong. Here, let us help you with that integration. Let's agree by contract what I'll do and what you'll do in this equation, so that we know who's liable and responsible and accountable for what. And what it's going to do is it's going to increase the due diligence of users. They're going to go out and demand more information from providers. Providers are going to be ready for it. They're going to be able to deliver the solutions. But the key and critical part of this is that everybody knows what everyone else is responsible for. And they have the ability to disclose and share where things can go wrong. And this just creates a much more informed environment. And I'll just add one more part to this, which is we demand through independent audit of AI system, the disclosure of residual risk. Why do we do that? So that users on the of these tools show up informed of what the risks are of the tools. This is very much like the FDA drug environment. And if you live in the United States and you're listening to this, you've seen the commercials, right? They're a minute long. The first 30 seconds tell you how the drug works. The second 30 seconds tell you all the things that might go wrong, all the side effects, right, from clinical trials. Well, this is the same sort of disclosure of residual risk we need for our AI systems, because then the users will show up and know what the potential side effects are. What are the potential risks of using this system? And now I'm an informed user who can use it smartly, intelligently, robustly, and correctly.
Yeah, that is very important. And I totally agree with you there. And having the communication and the right conversation for the different levels in the company, whether it's the C-level or the front lines or the mid lines, right, is going to be really important. So I can see how that can be complicated and how one needs to kind of work on it from the preventative side, right? I mean, that's what I do. Is I'm a risk professional, risk management, security, holistic security professional. So, right, who do you talk to about what is as important as what you are talking, because otherwise it is not going to make sense to the same conversation will not make sense to all the different levels in a company. Also, to your point, actually, Ryan, what you had said earlier about identifying the residual risk and holding the accountability very close to the origin point in this case, well, I think is fantastic for our classic cybersecurity issues. For example, SolarWinds, right? How do you avoid the SolarWinds? And this is what this will do. How do you avoid the SolarWind happening? Because the tool manufacturer or the software or platform manufacturer is clear as to what is the risk they have identified, what is the risk they have mitigated, and what is their residual risk that then goes to the client, right? And then it's up to the client to figure out that, yes, this is a part of my risk appetite or not. So really, really important points. Now, I'll just ask one more question. I know we're coming to the end of our session, but by the way, this is such a good conversation. I'm really excited that we are doing this. I'll lead out with being a devil's advocate and ask you, can audit actually make the engagement more risky or the environment more risky, the one that your auditors will be going into? Can it introduce more risk?
Can it introduce more risk? I actually think it's the best combination of worlds. So one of the things that I ran into early on in promoting independent audit of AI systems was, well, I don't want to share, or I don't want people looking at my intellectual property or my trade secrets. I think actually independent audit is the best solution there, because if governments and regulators ask about your tools, they will demand transparency, which will defeat your trade secrets and your intellectual property. Whereas with an auditor, you can govern them under a non-disclosure agreement. So they can get access to things, but then not share it. And it's a confidential relationship. Now, that's not a perfect thing. And sometimes there's going to be leaks from that. And that's always a challenge. So the more people who are involved, the more potential leaks there are. The greater the transparency. You are providing the rules or the vehicle to allow people more access to your work. So transparency is a balance against cybersecurity or against security. So for example, when we talk about our cybersecurity is not best practice compliance. It's minimal levels of compliance. Why? Well, because the best practice of cybersecurity should be secret. Don't tell anybody what you're doing. Don't tell anyone what your defenses are. Have these minimum levels of compliance, because by the way, there's a lot of people who don't. And when they don't, that's when we have huge breaches. but let's get to a minimum level. And then, by the way, make sure you're doing stuff on top of that. So in the end, independent audit and disclosure should not be too problematic. That does create a few more attack vectors, and we guard that in our audit infrastructure. But those very few new attack vectors are a very small trade-off for the great value that comes from governance, oversight, and accountability of these tools.
Okay, thank you. I will highlight this again for the audience, that this is a very significant point. If your auditors are coming in equipped with the right cybersecurity measures themselves, so anything that they are privy to, they are able to protect as a part of their data, as a part of their process, then this actually can help fortify where you don't have to worry about providing transparency to your competitors, to the rest of the world, to the government even, or whoever your, wherever your governing body is, right? Outside of the company, I mean, because if you have a trusted auditor coming in and they are privy to your intellectual property, hey, you know what? It stays there. It does not go into the hands of a competitor or anyone else who can use it for the wrong purposes. So I think I really want to highlight that again and again, because that is a very important point and really important. We have to protect against it. We have to make sure the auditors are aware of that, but also the benefit is that, yes, we need transparency, but not transparency at the risk of your AI model. And, large companies will have more than one model, right? They'll have thousands of models depending on where they're at. So really important point. And I think that's my last question, and it's a good.
Well, and let me just add one thing really quick, and I know we're against time, but that's what For Humanity is trying to remedy, right? We want to build this level ecosystem, but it has governance of the entities and the persons doing this work. When you become a For Humanity certified auditor, you have to agree the code of conduct or sort of code of ethics and professional conduct. We hold them to a high standard that includes confidentiality. So those who violate confidentiality, you know what's going to happen? They're going to be kicked out of the industry. And that's the role that we play. Why? Because we need people operating at a high level to ensure that this is done in a robust and professional fashion that protects the clients, that protects the profession of engaging in audit to ensure that it's done confidentially in this particular case. So I'll conclude on that as well. I know we went over a little bit, but I appreciate you letting me slip that in, Pamela.
Well, thank you so much. And you must be our auditor, because each time you answered a question, you asked me, did I answer the question? So I love that about this, the whole interview and talking to you. Ryan, thank you so much. And
it's my pleasure, and I'm happy to come back and we can continue the dialogue at your convenience. So
I would love to. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Pamela.
Bye.